I did not know what to expect. What could be my expectations from a $327 kit amplifier? Now, it was designed by the legend himself, Nelson Pass. So I did have some expectations there. Like, Nelson's the real deal. Like, when he sets his mind to something, it's got to be great. But still, it's $327, and it is a kit. But how good can a kit amp sound? That is the question. So, my friend, in last week's video, it was me speaking with Robert about the process of building the kit. Actually, two of them, because it can be run as a stereo amplifier or as a mono balanced amplifier. So we got both kits so we could try it both ways, just stereo and also as monos, because there's a switch on the back. Actually, it looks like that. Switch right in the top in the middle there. And you can go back and forth and easily switch between stereo and monophonic operation. I listened at Robert's and I liked what I heard, but not until I got these puppies home did I really begin to comprehend their true sound potential. I'm gonna let the cat out of the bag right away. It's really, really good. Really good. I mean, I am massively impressed. Now, I will say up front that the difference in sound of this amplifier run in stereo or run as monos is very, very significant. It's not a golden ear subtle difference. It's a big difference. And they are Class A designs, pure Class A, and they're 8 watts per channel in stereo. So this little beast runs hot, definitely hot to the touch. Not warm, hot. But 8 watts channel, how far can 8 watts go? Well, further than you would think. 8 watts with the right speaker can play satisfyingly loud. Now, I'm not recommending that people who are into having loud parties, you want to recreate, Led Zeppelin at what? No, it's not going to play super loud. No, that's not what it's doing. And it's not a visceral sound with 8 watts, or when you run them as monos, as 15 watt for each channel. 8 watts, 15 watts, or 30 watts, or even 50 watts isn't going to be a party animal type of amplifier. That's not what this is about. And if that's what you need, then, the 8 watt or 15 watt version of the Amp Camp amp ain't going to cut it. No doubt about it. But let us proceed, because I will tell you that to test my theories here, though I wound up using my Klipsch Cornwall 4's very high sensitivity horn speakers for the bulk of my listening tests, I did spend significant time listening to the Amp Camp amp in stereo and as monos with a low sensitivity, or actually a medium-ish sensitivity speaker, the Wharfdale Evo 4.3 tower speakers. Now, their sensitivity rating is 88 dB. That makes them sort of moderate, really. And you know what? In stereo with 8 watts per channel, it played, to me, and I'm not into loud, but satisfyingly enough loud. But if you're into, I live in an apartment, I can't, drive my neighbors crazy kind of person, 8 watts might just be more than enough for you. More than enough. Might be enough for you. And of course, if 8 watts isn't quite cutting it, you can double it more or less to 15 watts per channel and get 2. And over the course of this review, I'm going to compare the Amp Camp amp with the Schiit Aegir, which is 20 watts per channel, and that is $799 in stereo. And they can also be run as mono for double the price. Also, the First Watt J2, which is $4,000, so more than 10 times as expensive. And also, though I wasn't initially planning on doing this, the Zen Triode, the Deckware Zen Triode, which is 2 watts per channel, 2.3 watts per channel, and that little guy is $995. For all of these comparisons, they were done on the Klipsch Cornwall 4s, because that's what I have here. Oh, how I wish at this very moment, as I was doing this review, that I had a set of Klipsch RP600Ms, which are about $600 horn speaker, and that would have been so great to have for this review, but it wasn't going to happen. So I got to work with what I got, and what I got for this review were those two speakers, the Cornwalls and the Wharfedale Evo 4.3. So low sensitivity speaker and a very high sensitivity speaker. So I just want to make a brief mention here about one other aspect of the design. I got to bring this up. It is important in the context of this discussion. And that is that the amp-camp amp, when run in stereo, has low sensitivity. It only has 14 dB of gain, which means you'd have to turn up the volume more than you would normally expect to, not because it's 8 watts per channel, but because it has lower sensitivity than most amplifiers. Most amplifiers are 6, 8 dB higher in sensitivity, and that will make a difference in the position of the volume control. So with the amp-camp amp, you got to turn it up, but not so much because it's 8 watts per channel. Now, in terms of what does this amp sound like? Well, it does sound like a Nelson Pass design, meaning his Pass Labs designs and his First Watt designs, but more like a First Watt, not surprisingly. And it has generous amounts, let's put it that way, of second harmonic distortion. It is not a great measuring amplifier. That you don't buy this amplifier because you're a measurement geek. If you are, you can stop watching right now. This isn't the amp for you. I'll put it that way. Me, on the other hand, I don't mind a bit of distortion if it's pleasant. I mean, that's why people love tube amplifiers, because they don't necessarily measure well. They just sound really nice, or good ones sound really nice. And so it is with the amp-camp amp in stereo, because I'll get to the mono part of the story in a little bit. It sounds warm and sweet and musical, and the image just kind of opens up and blooms. Wall of sound that just kind of is a big hug. It's hugging you. The sound of this amplifier is hugging you. I can't think of a better way to describe what the amp-camp amp sounds like when run in stereo. Comma. Now, when you run it in balanced mono with a balanced connection, the distortion is canceled by running it. The circuitry is canceling the distortion, that second harmonic, when run in balanced mode. It sounds significantly more like the First Watt J2. Not identical to the First Watt J2, that $4,000 amplifier, but more like it. And it has, you know, tighter bass and a tighter image focus, and just it's cleaner, more transparent when run as mono amplifiers with RCA input or with XLR balanced input. So it's kind of, I wouldn't even call it a chameleon, I'd call it schizophrenic, right? It has two distinct personalities. The stereo version is the warm hug, and the mono version is more neutral, more accurate, and more pleasing to many people's ears. Now this, of course, like everything in high-end audio, is a subjective piece, right? It just is. It's part of what being an audiophile is like, is figuring out what works for you. What will please your ear is what this is all about, what this channel is all about. There's no hard and fast answers to say A is always better than B, or C or D or E or F. It's what you like, what works in your room, what works with your taste in music, how loud do you play, etc., etc., etc. There's a million variables. So it's hard to predict. I mean, I've spent way more than half my life working in audio trying to nail it down, to make it into easier, you know, bite-sized bits. And I'm doing the best I can. But this amplifier, because it goes two ways, to soft and fluffy and a big hug, to far more accurate and neutral, you can have it your way, so to speak. So, you know, another quick little aside here is, yes, with low-powered amplifiers, this amp or a 20 watt per channel amp like the Schiit Aegir, or a 50 watt per channel amp, if you want to play a little louder, using high sensitivity speakers is a really good idea. And some of the better ones out there, in addition to Klipsch, are Tecton JBL horns. There's lots of used ones you can find on eBay. For the purpose of this review, let's just call high sensitivity speaker anything with a sensitivity rating over 90, 92 dB for 1 watt. We'll call that high sensitivity. And that would be a good match to an amp like this, or as I say, any low-powered amp, because believe me, the difference between 8 watts and 20 watts, it's not going to change your life. It's going to play, the 20 watts will play a little bit louder than 8 watts, not like a lot louder. So don't prejudge what 8 watts can do for you. So regarding these comparisons, now, the ones I did with the first watt J2, which is 25 watts per channel, but 10 times the price. Yes, the J2 is a more muscular amp, and I don't mean that it's playing louder. I just mean it sounds brawnier. It's got more control over the bass. It's more dynamically alive. It has better soundstage depth. It's more transparent. It is significantly better, especially when I'm listening to the Amp Camp amp in stereo, the stereo version, right? But when I switched over to the mono version, it moved a couple of steps closer to the sound of the J2. And the two of them together is $654. So that's an amazing price for something that gets you some of that J2 sound. They definitely cut from the same sonic cloth. Next up was the Schiit Aegir, $799, 20 watts a channel. That amplifier also runs really, really hot. It's Class A, I believe, for its first 10 watts of its 20 watt output. So it puts out a lot of heat. And yeah, the stereo Amp Camp amp was that warm, embracing hug. And going to the Aegir was far more neutral, far more control, more dynamically alive, etc., etc., etc. At this point in the process, that's what I expected, and that's what I got. But switching over to the mono versions, which are still less than the Aegir, the two Amp Camp amps together, well, that was a tighter race. Now, I will say right up front here that there was no decisive winner. There was things I liked about the Aegir. I think the Aegir is the more neutral of the two, Aegir versus Amp Camp amp monos. It has great bass control. It's still a warmish sounding design on the Cornwall 4s, but switching over to the Amp Camp amp monos, I felt that openness just come through more, that the Aegir seemed a little uptight by comparison. I still call this a draw, really, and of course the advantage of the Aegir is that it's not a kit, so you just buy it, open the box, plug it in, and you're good to go. But you know, the thing about the kit is, if you look at the forums, and there's lots of, I'll link to what I can find, about upgrading the Amp Camp amp by using better capacitors and resistors and a better power supply, etc. You know, there's hours of fun. There's basically no limits of what people do with these amplifiers. So that's one of the reasons to build a kit, is because you feel like you made something with your own hands. You made it. You took a bunch of resistors and capacitors and pieces of metal and you soldered them together, and voila, you have an amplifier, a really, really beautiful sounding amplifier. You and Nelson Pass made this thing. That's pretty cool. So as much as I admire the Aegir, it doesn't offer that kind of upgradability to anywhere near the degree of the Amp Camp amp. Because the thing about the Amp Camp amp, not that I want to turn this into an ad, I'm just pointing these things out, is it was designed to be built by novice builders. You don't have to be a genius to pull this thing off. Robert had never built one before, and he managed to build not one but two in 2 days. So that's pretty cool. So cool, but it's a hot running amp. Did I mention that before? Yeah, it runs really, really hot. So the wild card in this review is the Deckware Zen Triode tube amplifier, Class A tube amplifier. It's 2.3 watts, so it's a quarter the power. But it actually sounded Well, faster. It had more life in it than the stereo amp camp amp. It sounded more, in that sense, more solid state, more of the expectations that the more powerful amp would have. But in this case, the less powerful amp, the 2-watt deckware, had more spring in its step than the stereo amp camp amp. I didn't see that coming, but it just, but I have to point out before I go any further in this comparison that the thing about tube amplifiers, and specifically this one, is you can change the sound a lot. Like this amp has adjustments, to position adjustment for the bias setting for the input tube, and that changes the sound a lot. And it has impedance switches, high, low impedance for each channel. And of course you can change the sound of any tube amplifier by changing the amplifying part of the design, which are the tubes, right? So the deckware is a kind of roll your own kind of sound. I'm just describing it as I did it in that moment, that it had more life, more dynamic oomph than the amp camp amp in stereo. Now going to the mono versions of the amp camp amp, the situation reversed, and now the amp camp amp was more alive, but also just more bigger, wider, more dimensional, more musical. I was playing this dynamically uncompressed recording by Wycliffe Gordon. It's a Chesky record. I was present at the session. And I gotta say that the amp camp amp, just hearing those dynamics of this big band, it's a New Orleans big band, and just hearing them wailing away over the cornwalls. Wow, that recording amazes me every time I play it. And it did it with the deckware. I was playing peaks at 91 dB. That's pretty freaking loud, right? And I was doing the same with the amp camp amp in stereo and mono. So yes, you could play with a 3-watt amplifier, just a tiny amount of watts, big sounds with the right. Now you're probably not going to have as high a sensitivity speaker as the Cornwall, which is 102 dB for 1 watt. But if you had one that was in the 90s, you would still probably get to almost as loud. So again, I have to stress that a handful of watts will play loud. What they won't do, when I return to the J2, which is 25 watts a channel, I wasn't playing it louder, but it had more balls, it had more oomph, it had more kick in the bass. The dynamics just opened up more with the 25 watt per channel amp. So I'm not saying that low powered amps are the solution for everybody all the time. If you want to get a taste of what high-end audio and the audiophile pursuit, and that's what it is, it's a pursuit, it's a goal. If you want to get a taste of what that is and what it's about, and you don't need to play music really loud, buying this amp for $327 and teaching yourself how to solder before you attempt to build the amplifier, it will pay, as they say, dividends. It will pay significant dividends to have that under your belt and the pride of ownership that will give you. Now, there are other kits on the market, and I don't intend to review DIY stuff in general. This just was one of those I couldn't resist, because after all, my vision isn't good enough to solder, and my motor skills are not what they were, so I'm not going to be building any kits, so sorry. But this one was I just couldn't pass this one up. Before I go, the other application for low-powered amplifiers in general is to use them in near-field applications, like on a desktop where you're sitting 3-4 feet away from the speakers, or which I prefer actually is not on a desktop and having the speakers pulled way out into the room, because you'd be using small speakers. It's easy to do. Pull the speakers way out into the room, 5-6 feet away from the wall behind them temporarily, and you're sitting 3 to 4 feet away from the speakers, and if the speakers are any good at all, they will disappear because there's no nearby reflections. You're just hearing point sources essentially, and the imaging will be, pardon the cliche, holographic, just like wow. Matter of fact, when I do this mono, I'm not a fan of mono recordings, but when I hear mono in that near field environment like that, Oh yeah, I suddenly get it. I am jumping for joy when I hear a mono that way, because you just hear this space between the speakers, but it has fantastic depth, and you hear into the recording. Oh, it's incredible. So low-powered amplifiers, when they don't have to fill a room, when you're right up near the speakers, you can get by with 8 watts or 10 watts or 20 watts or 2 watts. And it might, depending on your expectations of loudness, be all you need. So a little amp like this could be just the ticket for near-field applications. So today it was all about this little guy, the Amp Camp Amp. I like this amplifier. I was blown away by this amplifier. I love my job. When I could get to do stuff like this, it is just so gratifying. My name is Steve Guttenberg, and this continues to be the Audiophiliac Daily Show. If you like what I do, you can there's still room for you at the Audiophiliac Daily Show channel. I still can squeeze you in. I'll talk to somebody in management. I'm going to get you in, and you can join us. Because I may cap this at some point and say, no more subscribers. We got a full house here. We don't need any more. I'm joking, of course. But seriously, if you have not yet subscribed, please do. And if you have already subscribed, thank you so much for doing that. Lest I forget, don't forget to check out the Patreon, which can be found at patreon.com/audiophiliac. And I will link to that directly below in the description. But while you're here, check out the playlist. There's playlists for speaker reviews and electronics reviews and headphone reviews and music reviews, not to mention interviews with Nelson Pass, with Eric from Tecton, with John Grado from Grado Labs, with Harry Weisfeld from BPI. They're all here. They're all on those playlists. So please do check them out. And now I can say, at last, my work here is complete. Thank you so much for watching. And I mean it when I say I really do hope to see you back here again very, very soon. Bye-bye.